know what? It works as a pointer, and I'll just use it as a pointer if I need to point anything out. Okay, that's fine. So I don't need it plugged in. Oh, yeah, I do. No, I don't.
No, but yeah, because
Yeah. Maybe I somehow missed
Okay, we're good?
it doesn't seem. Okay,
Good to go.
which of these light buttons?
That far one that says front.
Nope. Some say it's really
You're
slow
gonna have
Dr. Cirillo is a candidate for the RT position that we have, and she's going to talk about her research and where she would like to go if she were appointed here. So she'll talk for about 45 minutes, and we'll have some time for questions afterwards. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here today and pleased to be able to share my vision of what I see as sort of a 5-year plan or how I would map out a 5-year plan for research. And just as a, oops, there we go. I'm going to have to learn how many clicks I have to do to change the slide. Just as an outline of what I'm going to be talking about today, I'm going to first present background information on my previous respiratory therapy work and my anthropological research. Next, I'm going to present my key research theme, why I think it's important, and the priority. I don't know why that does that. Is that just supposed to ring at me? And why I think it's important, and how I'm going to sort of conceptualize or actualize or define a research theme. What is the key research themes I want to address, why I want to do that, what are the priorities within that theme, as well as, like I said, outline the process of how I will determine sort of individual or broader research topics or projects, if you want to think of it that way. And with that, I'll be talking about consultation, collaboration, risk-benefit. Then I'm going to provide some examples on some research that I think would fit into there, and then talk about community capacity building, as well as publications and research grants, which is part of this cycle of the whole research process. And then I'll summarize the broad goals that I want to work towards together with the department. So, like many RTs in Manitoba, I attended what was then the Health Sciences School of Respiratory Technology. In fact, it was actually technology. I always think of it as therapy because it changed right around that time. And I spent the requisite number of hours in the study hall, and where you could get, 2 drafts for $1.50 back then, right? My first job out of respiratory therapy was at the Health Sciences Center, and I learned a lot there. I really did. The staff were really mentors, and they took a sort of a brash young respiratory therapist and really, turned me into a clinician. You may recognize a few of these. We really had a close group there, within the whole hospital. There was a lot of extracurricular activities, and we really worked as a team, and a cross-disciplinary team, and had a lot of cohesion. And like I said, it was really a great learning experience for me, and it really helped shape my views of sort of team healthcare. Life then took me to Cornwall, Ontario, which is you see in that picture, and I worked in home care then. So again, I really learned a lot about providing services in the community to patients, to clients, and including taking regular trips over that bridge into the United States, because that's how you had to go in order to get onto the Mohawk Nation, where I also had clients. One of the challenges was that they're really fond of giving directions in Ontario, in the rural areas, by Red Barns, and they have a lot of Red Barns. So I learned to recognize the subtle differences between the Red Barns, because you always had to, go 10 miles past a Red Barn or turn at a Red Barn. And this is well before GPS. My next stop was in northern Manitoba at the Thompson General Hospital. I couldn't find a picture of the actual hospital. But anyways, there I continued to sort of build on my knowledge, and also gained new knowledge. I had the opportunity to work in practice areas where I hadn't worked before, particularly neonates and pediatrics. When physicians were not present at the hospital, I ran the resuscitations until they came, so including the medications, everything, the intubations, the whole show. I attended all the high-risk deliveries. Again, like, we didn't have a high-risk team, you know, that would come from the children's hospital, right? We didn't have that. So I was the one standing there, you know, and waiting to suction the baby if needed, intubate the baby if needed, bag the baby if needed, you know, put in a cord line. I also had the opportunity to go on life flight transports to Winnipeg with the adults, because they did always send a team for the pediatrics and the neonates. And for me also, this was my first real exposure to providing services to a predominantly Indigenous population. And I benefited from that. Do I just ignore that?
You know what, touch the screen
Okay.
on the bottom there, like look.
There's an X.
Yeah, don't click.
Okay. So I'm going to just click no, but maybe it'll just stop.
No, you just need to tell it you're using it still.
Okay. Okay. Hopefully that doesn't slow me down. In any event, it was really a great experience. I mean, I've learned from all of my different experiences. Those of you who get the chance to go to Thompson, you know, and you have the chance to go out of the city for a while, Pichu Falls is just stunning, whether the winter or the summer. I was also there during the really big 1989 Northern Manitoba fires. And that was, I mean, there's never been another, in historical records of a fire that large, not last summer, not any other summer. There was, like, I think something like over 3 million hectares burned. And we had a lot of, of course, because of the smoke, a lot of problems, respiratory problems with that. And dozens of remote First Nations communities were evacuated to Thompson and then eventually to Winnipeg, because most of Thompson was evacuated as well. In between moving to Calgary, I also worked, when we came back to Winnipeg, I worked casual at a number of different hospitals. I was saying to Puck earlier that I think the only hospital that I didn't work at was the Concordia Hospital. And I never really actually worked at St. B or Health Sciences Center out past my student years either. But when we moved to Calgary, I studied diving and hyperbaric medicine in the US and got the hours and wrote the board exams and became a certified diving and hyperbaric medicine therapist. And I did that because I had the opportunity in Calgary to be a consultant in opening the first hyperbaric medical therapy clinic there, getting that clinic, training staff and getting it accredited through provincial bodies. And I also did the same in Nashville and Tennessee, doing that. But at that time, I was, you know, taking some distance education courses and wanting to go back to university. Although, you know, I didn't really have a solid plan on, you know, I just wanted to explore some other interests of mine. And that led to going into our anthropology and archaeology and taking courses in that. So while I was an undergrad student and into when I was a graduate student, I came back to Manitoba every summer because we have family here and we would be visiting, and I, you know, just exclusively worked here. I didn't work in Alberta at all, and that funded my education and also gave me the chance to keep up my respiratory therapy license, because I didn't want to do that, to lose that. You know, being at risk of not having another job. I'd been through several of the downturns in respiratory therapy, and, you know, when we had come back to Winnipeg, I'd been scrabbling to, you know, pick up enough hours at different hospitals in order to have my hours in. So I was very careful to not let that happen. So it was a win-win, you know. I was also starting to do some research, archaeological research in Manitoba and on the Canadian Plains, and you know, that really worked out well for me. And this was actually my last shift at Victoria Hospital in 2006. Not that I'd spent the whole shift sleeping, I did not, in fact. But I'd worked, I think 3 days of double shifts. So I'd been there for, 3 24-hour days nonstop. So when I started university full-time in 2000, I initially did a BSc honors degree focusing on archaeology as a branch of anthropology. So those of you who have never taken an anthropology course before, has anybody? Okay, Linda, you can't put up your hand. Buck, you did? Awesome. See, there's several people here. So for those of you who aren't familiar, in North America, archaeology is included in a four-field with anthropology, and as is cultural and social anthropology and physical or biological anthropology and linguistics. And so my research has really focused on archaeology, cultural anthropology, and biological anthropology. My specific specialization within that, just like a respiratory therapist, well, I really work in neonates, and that's sort of my specialization. It doesn't mean I don't know anything about adults, is ethnobotany. Okay, so that's basically the study of how people use plants and how they affect each other. And I interpret this into the past by studying modern cultures and learning about their traditional use of plants, tapping into their traditional knowledge. Ethnobotanical investigations are very integrative and multidisciplinary. I have to draw on a lot of different fields in order to conduct the research and to interpret my research, including a long list that you can see there. So as I said, my main regions, well, I didn't say this, but I'm going to tell you. The main regions that I've worked in are the Canadian Plains, including Alberta and Saskatchewan and Manitoba. These are called the Northern Plains or the Northwestern Plains, but also the Southern Plains down in New Mexico, Colorado, Texas, Arizona, and even into Chihuahua, Mexico. And so on my Northern Plains, Canadian Plains research, I began this research while I was an undergrad, and my focus was on the use of wild plants as well as prehistoric agriculture by the First Nations. Okay, so First Nations people in some areas practice agriculture. Brief period of time in Manitoba that occurred, and did not in Saskatchewan in Alberta, as far as we know. Okay, there's no record of using domesticated plants like corn, beans, squash, the traditional plants. These plants, even in Manitoba, when people here were growing corn, were introduced from the south and the southeast, so Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota. And people there lived in permanent villages called earth lodge villages, just named after the type of dwelling that they lived in, an earth lodge. So for me, what I was looking at was, like I said, the use of wild plants and also the introduction of agricultural plants. But in Alberta, what I really focused on was looking for agricultural plants, knowing that these would have been traded into the region, okay, to look at sort of social dynamics between these different groups. And that's me up there at the Manitoba Museum, sampling artifacts from the Lockport site, which is at Lockport, where they were growing corn. And my friend Kevin Brownlee, I forgot to ask you, Linda, if you knew Kevin, of course you do, who's the curator of archaeology at the Manitoba Museum and is First Nations Métis heritage. So what this research showed was that agriculture, although it was never practiced in Alberta and further west, and only for a short period of time in Manitoba, as far as we know or understand, that people were using wild plants, but they were also trading for corn, and that probably involved the reciprocal trade of large amounts of bison meat in return. I have to. In Alberta, I had the privilege, and really it was a privilege, to be involved in a unique opportunity. As I said, people there never, to our knowledge, grew any domesticated crops or any crops, but they were masters at really using the wild resources, wild plant resources, to the point of really being incipient domestication, and are known more as nomadic hunter-gatherers. Okay? This is on the Siksika Nation. Also, the Siksika Nation is one of the 7 nations comprising the Blackfoot Confederacy. And it's just a little west of Calgary, but there's a very unique site there. And that's here. I don't know how well you can see it, okay, but there's this, you can see sort of that ditch there. And it's known as the Cluny Fortified Village Site, okay? And Siksika oral history, and it's the outline of it, the architecture of this settlement is very similar to what's found in North Dakota, South Dakota, where those permanent villages of agricultural people were. So it's always been thought that this might be. The Siksika oral history, their oral tradition, tells that these were people that came into Alberta from the south and the east and lived there for a period of time and left. So they had also been, at the same time, interested in the Siksika Nation in opening their own interpretive center to tell their own culture history, okay, their own history of their culture, including the residential school years, the signing of Treaty 7, which occurred at Blackfoot Crossing right here on their land. And they invited the University of Calgary to start an archaeological field school there, and which I was involved in. So these are actually historic from 1960 excavations at that site. And my role at the University of Calgary, I was as a student, I was the head of the library, the department library. And so I got to be engaged with the Siksika because they were wanting to repatriate the artifacts that we had. And I provided them also with documentary evidence, or what files we had on these excavations. And they were interested in us conducting new excavations with their own goals of learning about their history and interpreting this knowledge through their viewpoint and their oral traditions. So, like I said, I had this wonderful opportunity to help with the first field school to repatriate artifacts, and they eventually opened their interpretive center. And if you ever have a chance to go there, it's absolutely stunning. It's really beautiful. The second area that I've specialized my research in is South America, particularly Ecuador and Peru. Okay, and my first research in Ecuador was on the coastal side of Ecuador. So most people think of it as that I'm working in this beautiful tropical warm location because it's Ecuador, meaning it must be on the equator. And that is true for some parts of the coast, but generally it's very dry. So it's not it's warm, but it's very dry. In any event, this is my meme of what people think I do, and I'll show some more of what I actually do in addition to excavations. Is basically like I was doing at the University of Manitoba. I see my work as cleaning the dirty dishes. Okay, so here I'm sampling pottery, ceramics for residues, plant residues, and I also spend a lot of time washing dirt. Buckets and buckets and buckets of dirt to recover plant remains. Okay, so again, I was looking at agricultural communities. These are some of the earliest villages. People would argue they are the earliest formal villages in all of the Americas, dating back 6,000 years. And there was controversy and a lot of actually very heated debate about when corn agriculture was established there. And so my research definitively established that it was early, that it was 6,000 years old. And I got hate mail because of that. It truly did, from people that didn't like that. And we also discovered the earliest chili peppers in the Americas. So there was a big paper about that. The press loves doing silly things like lighting chili peppers on fire. Most of my research, however, in Ecuador has been in the highlands. And I know this isn't coming out very well, but and it doesn't matter. But this is, sort of gives you an idea of the topography. The coast is very low. This is the Amazon basin here, and this is the highlands. And yes, they are very, very high, okay? So I was looking at, again, sort of the establishment of permanent villages and agriculture and the social dynamics that were going on in the highlands, okay? But I was also working at a site because I wanted to see, I knew a lot about the coast. Everybody knew a lot about the coast by now. Most of the research has occurred there. When what sort of the dynamics were between these three different regions and how these different groups living in these different regions were interacting, okay? And so, yep, no tropical climate up there, okay? This is what I really do. I'm not, sitting on a beach, getting lots of sun in a warm spot. Lots of excavation, lots of cleaning dirty dishes, and then the magic happens in the lab. So what I discovered that in fact this emergence of corn agriculture was almost as early in the highlands as it was in the coast, but that the people were really using primarily crops that were suited to that very high elevation environment where it's cold. And is more similar to what we would be growing here versus what people in Mexico would be growing, because you can get those variations over a very short distance there because of the very extreme and rapid changes in elevation. And most of those crops were showing that people were involved in really diverse and far afield interaction spheres, okay? Interacting with people far to the south in Peru, which is where a lot of these crops came from, but also the Amazon basin and other areas. And importantly, that these crops weren't just picked willy-nilly, they were nutritionally complete, okay? So people there don't eat a lot of meat, never have, still don't, but they got complete proteins, minerals and amino acids that they needed from these very specific different crops. I know I'm talking a lot about archaeology, but this is the end, okay? No, almost the end. One of the offshoots of my dissertation research, I said I had worked on this site in the Amazon, was that I thought I had the microscopic traces of cacao. Cacao is the pod, okay, and the seeds inside are what's then dried, ground, made into chocolate, okay? So what I did was I assembled a research team of other archaeologists that had been more familiar with doing this research because they worked in Mesoamerica or Mexico and Central America, and ancient DNA specialists, as well as chemists, to confirm these traces of cacao. And I just submitted the paper last week to Nature, Ecology, and Evolution, and hopefully that will be submitted. This is the earliest cacao in the Americas, dating to, again, about 6,000 years ago. And this is sort of answering the question of where cacao originated from. It's thought, many people still propose that it was domesticated in Mexico, but geneticists have known for a long time that it was likely domesticated in the Amazon. And this is the first evidence for that. Okay, and lastly, in Peru, I work in a lot of different environments. People always think that I'm working at Machu Picchu. I'm not. I'm working in the highlands primarily, and you know, we don't have porters or anything like that. If we're lucky, we get a local that has some burros that will help us haul all our gear up to where we're working. This site that we're working at here is almost 5,000 meters in elevation. So this where we're camping is actually over 4,500 meters. Okay, and then you have those volcanoes surrounding us. It's always cold. It's very hard to breathe because of the elevation. Okay, this is a hypoxic environment to work in. And what we're interested in learning here, the site dates to over 12,000 years old. It's actually the highest, oldest Ice Age site in the world, is how people colonize this harsh environment. Did they do this in stages where they were slowly adapting to living at higher elevations? Or did they just go back and forth from the high elevation, getting resources and going back to a lower elevation? Or was that not a barrier at all, and did they just go and live there almost full-time right off the bat? Andean people today have a genetic mutation that a lot of the respiratory therapists will know this, that they are biologically adapted to living at higher elevations. And so one of the things that we want to do is to test for that. So, you know, do we have any students? Linda's not allowed to answer. That this is what I was excavating right there. Can anybody see what it is? It's hard to see. The projector's horrible. I should have done that different. It's a human burial. It's seated like this, and the head's missing, but all of the heads are missing at this site. We have about 7 human remains that we found there, and these are some of the earliest burials in the Americas and dating to that time period in that high elevation. So this is going to allow us to do actually the ancient DNA, looking for those genetic mutations. Are they present already? Did people have this? We know that they didn't come into the Americas with this mutation, but did they develop it very quickly? So the take-home message from this is that my past research in archaeology and anthropology is that we study humans, okay? Their culture, their biology, their physical and cultural adaptations to different environments, their health, and many other topics. I've been involved in organizing sort of single research, my own research, and developing those themes and carrying that research through, and in obtaining grants and publishing the results of that research. Those are, by the way, remains of tubers on the far right that are highland. So we knew that they were gathering resources there. So in all cases, though, I work with and collaborate with the local Indigenous people. I'm often asked, what's the coolest thing you found? Or, you know, what's the oldest thing you found? And for me, it's actually the people, okay? I've talked a lot about, oh, this is the earliest this and this is the earliest that, but what is important to me is and I benefited from, is the knowledge and the privilege I've had of working with the Indigenous people, whether it's like how to plant and harvest potatoes, how to process them so that they can be stored for long periods of time, how to properly cook guinea pigs, and you know, being honored by being served the guinea pig, which I have to eat because it is an honor, and that's only served on very special occasions. Okay? Or whether it's learning the proper way for women to go into the jungle in the Amazon to collect flowers or plants, all sorts of plants, which is to have the headband on, and women all will go into the forest to gather naked, and I wasn't required to go naked. Or learning the secrets, basically, of the hallucinogenic drug ayahuasca. And it's, like I said, it's the people that I've worked with that have really been the best part of my archaeological research, and that includes working on the Canadian Plains, learning about sweat lodges, going to powwows, And when there was the big floods in 2013, I headed straight to help my friends on the Siksika Nation. How am I doing for time? Oh, I'm okay. So I'll have to rush up a little bit, but I won't. So am I an because I'm getting to the stuff that you want to hear. So am I an anthropologist or a respiratory therapist? And I'm both. Okay? And combining these two disciplines is the sort of research I want to focus on with the emphasis of collaborating and collaboration with Indigenous communities. So at the top there, I've sort of stated that my main research theme is to conduct this interdisciplinary research to investigate and promote innovative, culturally sensitive, and community-driven ways to treat respiratory illness in Indigenous communities. Okay? So I'm sure you all know, but just to be clear, that I'll use the word Indigenous and Aboriginal sort of interchangeably, but that term encompasses First Nations people, of which there is a great variety, the Inuit, as well as the Métis. And I'll just point out this fellow here. Okay, and he was, this is Louis Riel and his council. And this is Pierre Delorme, who was the great-great-great-grandfather of my 3 oldest children. So there are, why do I want to focus on this? Because of the large health disparities that are present. Okay, this is a health crisis in Canada. First Nations people are not a cultural group to Canada. They have distinct constitutionally recognized rights. They are a distinct constitutionally recognized people. Okay? The history of colonization and racism, discrimination continues to affect their health care and well-being of these communities. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission was formed as a means of reckoning with the devastating legacy of residential school simulation and abuse. In June 2015, they came out with the report based on those hearings, and from that came the 94 calls to action. Okay, these are individual instructions that are supposed to guide us to down the road to reconciliation. And 7 of these 94 calls to action specifically refer to healthcare. Okay, and these include to recognize and implement the healthcare rights of Aboriginal people. There's a whole host of them here, as you can see. Okay, and these are the principles that, in part, guide me. Okay, in my research. To address these calls to action and to report on these calls to action. And there's a website created by the CBC called Beyond 94, and this website, the CBC, is basically charting the progress of these calls to action and fact-checking, basically, in this age of fact-checking, what's being reported. Okay. The last 3, especially the last 2 here, I see as being a major goal as well, to increase the number of Aboriginal professionals working in the healthcare field, including respiratory therapy, and the retention of those people so that they are going back to their communities, if that's what they choose, to pass that along. I just want to quickly mention as well that this is also major plans and identified by the University of Manitoba. I know these came out really bad, these images, but you know, this is part of the University of Manitoba's strategic research plan, major goals within that, as well as the Faculty of Health Sciences research plans, as well as their Truth and Reconciliation action plans. Okay. So finally, I just want to give some stats, okay? and why this is really critical, and the role that respiratory therapists can play in this area. Okay, even though Canada has one of the highest healthcare ratings of healthcare in the world, and consistently in the top 10, Indigenous people's healthcare is usually ranked similar to developing nations. The disparity is across all manners of measures of healthcare. And here I've just put a series of sort of statistics about respiratory-related illnesses, which is a major burden and a major problem on especially remote Indigenous communities. Okay? So this is a further reason why I see this as very important. Okay? So my research priority is this area, but in the posting for this position, there was, also if people were interested in doing research in respiratory medicine and health promotion and primary care, and I don't see these as being excluded from my research. Okay? I see those as being included. Okay, and these are I thought it was up there, but on my notes it's down here. So these are the sort of the regions that I see as being the highest priority, from highest priority to not least priority, but you can only focus on so many things at one time. So Indigenous communities, particularly remote communities, the more local southern Indigenous communities, Métis communities, and First Nation communities, as well as the urban population. Okay, that we have the highest urban population, as you know, of anywhere in Canada of Indigenous people. And I also include other marginalized groups, because here I'm specifically referring to immigrant cultures who also suffer from health disparities and barriers to access to health care, okay, for cultural reasons, as well as any other, many other reasons, okay? So this busy slide here is basically the process that will occur over 5 years, okay, and how I plan to implement research. So you can see that it's basically repetitive between year 1. I would have specific goals that I want to address and get in place in my first year. That builds to the second and third years, and then that builds to the third and fifth years. And these involve consultation, which I'll talk about on the next slide, getting grants and funding, defining the specific research projects, involving students, and any other duties they have with students, like supervision or mentoring, and producing the reports and publications, because that is what you need in order to do the research and get the funding. Okay? So within each project, or the overall goal, there's going to be sort of short-term goals, and probably several of them that will be different sort of scope and size. Some are going to be smaller, some are going to be larger, right? But I want them all to contribute to that main research theme that I've identified, and that will build towards a very coherent research program. So, of course, I have to juggle those things with other duties that I'll have, teaching and service. But here again, I see these as also being opportunities to relate these duties to that goal, that overall research or theme of research that I want to engage in. So in order to develop the specific research projects, I will be involved in consulting with a number of stakeholders, okay? And this is to explore the types of current and planned research opportunities the department can be involved in. So my first task in this position would be to consult with the faculty, the Department of Respiratory Therapy faculty in particular, of course, as well as other faculty members in the college to determine, okay, what we feel should be the direction for this sort of research. Okay. There's also be, as you can see, a number of different people that I envision that will be consulted with, not necessarily all at once and not necessarily at the same time, or you know, at different stages, and maybe never that I will, you know, be collaborating or consulting with some of these, but there's probably a whole host of others that I haven't even, you know, identified here. So basically, you know, I envision research as a sort of a reciprocal collaborative process that creates this framework for setting and meeting short-term and long-term goals that are going to, again, contribute to this and advance this overall theme that I want to address. You've already seen the animation, so you don't want to see it again. But basically, you know, I want things to be working like this. And as you're doing these sorts of, you know, collaborations and working on with different people on different projects, it's very easy for things to break down, okay? And that's why I approach my research by setting very specific short-term goals. Do those short-term goals contribute to the long-term goals? Do those long-term goals encompass, you know, everything should be building towards something very specific, okay? And so we don't end up with that situation, okay? And in setting these goals, I also sort of look at every opportunity or project as in a sort of risk-benefit way, right? Is it like the, you know, picking the low-hanging fruit? Okay, so it's sort of easy to do and you get an immediate return. Or is it like, you know, this is peach palm tree that's used, the fruit's used a lot in the Amazon. It's very highly prized, but the trees go very tall, and it takes a lot of effort to collect it because the tree is also very spiny, the trunk, okay? So, but there are secrets. There are tricks to this, right? So what this Francisco Waorani guide that we had, he caught this monkey the first day we were there, and I thought I was going to have to eat the monkey, but I didn't have to eat the monkey because when I finally screwed up the courage to ask, he told me that he's going to train it to climb up the tree and get the fruit and harvest the fruit. Okay, so I'm not sure. I don't want to say that my trick is to employ a lot of monkeys because that's not what I mean, you know, but there are ways to make even harder, more you know, time and energy consuming projects easier, right? Because the payoff's bigger. So here are two examples of the sort of the research that I envision that the department would be involved in. The first is investigating and integrating or adapting traditional medicines, spiritual beliefs, and worldviews and technologies, okay, of the Indigenous people. And this would vary from community to community, but this is part of the consultation because our goal is to, in working collaboratively, truly collaboratively with Indigenous people, is to know what their needs are, what their wants are, okay, and how we can help them towards that. So I talked about sweat lodges before, and I'm not going to get into very specific details of how I think sweat lodges are going to contribute to, you know, COPD or whatever, but I do see it as an area that should be explored. So those of you who don't know what a sweat lodge is, does everybody know? Okay, so sweat lodge was, I had that one picture earlier. The saplings are fashioned and it's basically like a little igloo shape. And you go in there and there's this very specific traditional healer that conducts these ceremonies. hot rocks are, water's poured over it, so there's steam and it's very hot and humid in there. And I think that there could actually be therapeutic benefits to this. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to, haul everybody out, outside and get them in a sweat lodge. Okay. But for First Nations people, this is part of their culture, and part of their worldview and of health and healing. And it might be possible to adapt that to treatments. Okay. The same thing with smudges. Smudges like burning sweetgrass, and that is to cleanse, okay? Cleanse the body. My views on these are whether or not we can incorporate them or that we can identify specific, physiological benefits in the treatment of disease, is that we need to look at these as part of Truth and Reconciliation and incorporating these parts of their cultural, these spiritual beliefs. And as long as we're doing no harm by doing so, then it is going to assist First Nations and Indigenous people with their sense of health and well-being. Okay? And this also includes things like objects and names and symbols. Okay? One thing that I really do want to explore being an ethnobotanist is traditional medicines. Traditional plants that have been used traditionally in order to treat respiratory diseases by First Nations and Indigenous people, okay? And this includes Seneca. Some people call it snake root or milkwort. It's used as an antitussive, as an expectorant, and it breaks down thick secretions, okay? And this isn't just First Nations and Indigenous people that use this. They introduced the use of this to explorers who adopted the use of Seneca and then took it to Europe. Okay, so it has been known. This has been known for centuries. Okay, and so what are the actual physiological mechanisms, and can that be applied? And I'll talk a little bit more later about the ethics of doing this sort of research, because there are ethical issues. Okay, I'd also like to look at investigating and integrating and adapting modern technologies. So we have asthma clinics. Okay, we have an asthma clinic in Calgary, or sorry, I'm back home, my head, in Winnipeg, okay, at Seven Oaks. Is there another one in Winnipeg as well? That's the primary asthma clinic, okay. And there's also the one at the Children's Hospital, of course, for pediatrics, okay. I would like to explore with the respiratory therapy faculty and clinicians in the community and in the hospitals, can we mobilize this, okay? Is there a benefit? First of all, I mean, there's almost assuredly going to be a cost-saving benefit to this, instead of having patients come down to Winnipeg in order to, be assessed by an asthma clinic. But there's also a bigger social benefit to that, as people don't have to be removed from their communities and be in isolation, isolated from their communities for a period of time. Okay. I'd also like to look at developing a respiratory therapy wellness center in a northern location like Thompson or the PAW, probably Thompson. But again, these are ideas we have to think about and develop, do some pilot projects, whatever, to look at this, so that they're not coming as far, and we're bringing our services to them. Okay. Another thought I had was telemedicine, okay, for COPD, asthma, respiratory diseases, especially follow-up for children who have recurrent RSV problems, respiratory syncytial virus, okay, and tuberculosis, okay. We can do follow-up with them through telemedicine, going over their action plans, okay, to monitor their COPD and asthma, how they're doing, what medications were they taking, have they increased, decreased, all of that. And we can implement either at the community health center or in the home, depending on patients, pulse oximetry, peak flow meters, medications, and I don't know, has anybody ever used an electronic stethoscope?
Yes.
How well do they work? I mean, if somebody used an electronic stethoscope and you were video conferencing with them, pretty good?
Yeah.
So it's possible, right? It's possible to do this. I see all of these as opportunities, what I've just talked about, as well as what I'm going to talk about here, as opportunities for the RT faculty, the respiratory therapy faculty, and the larger RT community to be involved in research. In fact, I think it's essential, of course, because these are the experts in these areas. Okay, they're experienced in teaching, the faculty, okay, and experts providing these services and therapies. Okay, so another area that I think we can be involved in, and I want to explore, is smoking cessation and reduction programs, and I envision these as being land-based programs. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. BC has really successful smoking cessation programs with Indigenous communities. Okay. Indoor air quality. This is a major social determinant of health on First Nations communities and in Métis communities, Inuit communities, and there's all sorts of reasons for that, cultural and economic reasons. Okay? And maybe respiratory therapists have never been involved in looking at HEPA filters in order to decrease the secondhand smoke that's in homes. We can't necessarily force changes on culture, right, in people. But there's other issues with indoor air quality aside from secondhand smoke. So what can we do? How can we contribute to that? Okay? And again, the causes and prevention of respiratory disease. And I see this as being the opportunity for capacity building, community capacity building, okay? I mentioned, well, I didn't mention, but I will mention now, that the Aboriginal population in Canada is increasing 4 times faster, okay, almost done, 4 times faster than the Canadian, non-Indigenous Canadian population, okay? And that growth is in mostly youth. They have very high young population. So what I would like to do, again, is to develop opportunities for respiratory therapy faculty, the students, and the practitioners to engage with the Indigenous elders, the knowledge keepers, to be involved in reciprocal mentorships, okay? So we're imparting our knowledge and they're imparting their knowledge, okay? Experiential learning opportunities to understand and educate them, hopefully, on some of the problems that we see that leading to morbidity and mortality, okay? But in particular, I want to focus on working with, for instance, the school divisions and teachers to develop teaching modules. Okay? And we can get local students as research assistants to develop their research skills, local youth to develop videos in conjunction with us and their community to talk about respiratory health. These videos and other materials would be part of knowledge translation, okay? That the youth would be promoting these in their communities, okay? And of course, to attract, retain, and support Indigenous students. Okay? And this is what I mean by building community capacity, okay? Culture change doesn't happen overnight. And I mean, 20 years ago, you could smoke in a Safeway if you wanted to. True story. Maybe more than 20, okay, let's say 35 years ago, 30 years ago, okay? You know, the youth are the key to some of this. And I also just want to very briefly address what research, and there's other things, is and is not, okay? Ethics. I mentioned about investigating plants. This is cultural knowledge that we cannot appropriate and benefit financially from. There's also things that I haven't been shared, that people haven't shared with me because you have to be a specialist, okay? A traditional healer that doesn't share this knowledge with others, even in their own community, let alone someone from outside their community. Okay, so I just want people to be aware that I'm aware of this, okay? And we have to tread carefully on some of these. I mentioned already that there has to be the need, the communities have to identify the needs and their wants. Okay? Community capacity building, I see this as a major driver of this sort of research, as well as, of course, the translational knowledges and practices that hopefully come out of it. And grants. You know, where is the money and how can we tap into it for this sort of research? And I think there's plenty of opportunity because of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the calls to action and all the rest of it, okay? What it's not driven by is, as I said, our Western views of health and well-being and how cultures are supposed to operate, okay? And just telling people quit smoking doesn't work. And telling people don't smoke in your homes doesn't work. We're not there to dictate rules. It's not about job creation or cost savings or medical industry interests, although I see these as also being important. You know, our research is not to create jobs, but I think these are all going to happen. Okay, and then honestly, just a couple more minutes. Publications and research grants. So there's a lot of documentation that has to be produced from research, okay? And again, my priority, or a priority, is to make sure that the community is involved with those reports because they're collaborators, okay? And so we're addressing their interests and their needs and giving regular progress reports on it that are hopefully going to result in policy changes, as well as the education, those sorts of documents, okay? As far as publishing in peer-reviewed journals, I always aim for the journal with the highest impact factor, okay? If the research is applicable to that. And producing multiple publications from the same research, addressing different audiences or different topics. And so as you can see, I just quickly put it up. I'm not disrespecting the Canadian Journal of Respiratory Therapy that's ranked 117 out of 136 journals in the world that deal with pulmonary and respiratory medicine. I think it's actually an achievement that we're on the list. You know, the goal is to always publish in the journal that's going to give us the broadest readership, okay? And then, of course, these are the cyclical process that leads to, you know, getting large research grants from those institutions. So I'm just going to quickly, you can read that while I'm answering questions. I really am sorry. I thought that I would actually be finished in 45 minutes. And so that's the summary of the very broad, more impactful research goals or goals of research, okay, that I see. And I'm happy to answer questions if anybody has a minute.
I realize the time is up, so those of you that have to go, you probably should cut it off. I'll entertain one question. Okay. I guess you've answered everybody's questions.
Okay.